So you just know I couldn't resist the opportunity to make another video about SBF. Your boy, Sam Bankman-Fried, quote, dishonesty and unfair dealing are not fraud, seeks to dismiss charges. Now, if you don't know anything about Sam Bankman-Fried, basically running one of the biggest scams in cryptocurrency history. I think it was like 30-something billion. I believe that he's even been sued now by the IRS in the US for like $49 billion or something that just came out. He was running FTX, which was one of the biggest crypto exchanges, having billions of dollars run through it. And he was also running another company called Alameda. And what he was doing with that was using people's funds from FTX, which they thought was being stored on the exchange for them to, you know, withdraw or change or do whatever they wanted to do. But instead, he was just taking their money, moving it into his other company, and then using it for political donations, for risky investments, to sponsor League of Legends teams, just generally fraud, just real fraud. He's been arrested. He was arrested in the Bahamas, I believe, and he was extradited to the US. And now he's facing, I think it's 13 or something, 14 federal charges. And pretty much everyone at the top level of FTX has flipped on him and are working with the government against him. Basically, they've all gone, please, no prison for me. Let's just make sure Sam Bankman-Fried gets all the prison. And then, of course, all the federal arms of the US government have decided, hey, why don't we come in with a lawsuit of our own and get some of that ched? Even though there's not all that much ched left. But let's take a look. So late Monday, legally embroiled FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried moved to dismiss the majority of criminal charges lobbed against him by the United States government after his cryptocurrency exchange went bankrupt in 2022. Of course, bankruptcy just plays into the fact that all these people trying to sue FTX for money they don't have is just like, why? For what? They couldn't even pay back the money they owed people and institutional investors and other companies. So how are they going to pay back the US government and the IRS? Because apparently they weren't paying taxes. Just to add to the list of crimes. So in documents filed in Manhattan federal court, lawyers from the law firm Cohen and Gresser LLP shared Sam Bankman-Fried's first official legal defense. And oh boy, it's a fucking banger. Lawyers accused the US of a, quote, troubling and classic rush to judgment, claiming that the government didn't even wait to receive millions of documents and other evidence against Bankman-Fried before improperly seeking to turn civil and regulatory issues into federal crimes. So you didn't even wait to see the full extent of my crimes before you charged me with crimes. Not really the dub you think it is, to be honest, but I don't know. Maybe they've got some good points here. Let's move on. After FTX's collapse last year, federal prosecutors acted quickly to intervene, within a month alleging that Bankman-Fried was stealing billions in customers' funds, defrauding investors, committing bank and wire fraud, providing improper loans, misleading lenders, transmitting money without a license, making illegal campaign donations, bribing China officials, and other crimes. Just a little bit of crime there. Allegedly, of course, allegedly. This has still got to go through a court, so we'll use allegedly. Through it all, Bankman-Fried has pleaded not guilty. Now in his motions to dismiss, Bankman-Fried has requested an oral agreement to fight these baseless charges and clear his name. He's asking the court to dismiss 10 out of 13 charges, arguing that federal prosecutors have failed to substantiate most of their claims. They will during the trial, I imagine. I'd imagine that's where they're going to substantiate most of their claims. So the government's haste and apparent willingness to proceed without having all the relevant facts and information has produced an indictment that is not only improperly brought but legally flawed and should be dismissed, Bankman-Fried's lawyers argued in one of several memos filed yesterday. Bankman-Fried's lawyers also alleged that after extraditing Bankman-Fried from his home in the Bahamas, the US has failed to honour terms of an extradition treaty requiring that the Bahamas consent to all charges brought against Bankman-Fried. Now, this is the definition of a technicality, but also one that may play a big factor because, obviously, if you do have an extradition agreement with a country and you say, we'll do X, and then you don't do X, regardless of whether you're right and whether this person has done these things and whether you can get that person for those things, this is something that could come back to bite them in the arse. It's just how the legal world works. You could basically catch somebody stabbing somebody to death, and if there's like an improper chain of custody on evidence or, you know, witness tampering, anything that could call into question any of the facts of the case or any of the evidence, You're just not going to get that person. It just is how it is. So if you've taken him from the Bahamas under one agreement and then you're not adhering to that agreement, then this might play a factor, although we'll have to wait and see. Bankman-Fried now faces charges on 4 counts that were not encompassed by the courts listed in the Bahamas warrant of surrender, and to which the Bahamas has not consented, his lawyer alleged in court filings. Although, of course, they brought these charges after he was in the US, so I don't know how this works specifically. It's going to be an interesting one to follow. Should the court decide not to dismiss the charges, Bankman-Fried has asked the court to try the charges of illegal campaign contributions and foreign bribery separately from the charges of fraud and conspiracy. This might actually happen. So the lawyers argued that this would help, quote, avoid undue prejudice because a jury may use the evidence of one of the crimes charged to find his guilt of the other crime or crimes charged. Yeah, I don't even think this is an unreasonable request from a legal standpoint, as long as obviously the underlying agreement actually exists and works in the way that they're saying. It makes sense to me that you would try these two separately. In short, combining the charges could tempt the jury to infer a criminal disposition on the part of Bankman-Fried, who is allegedly a criminal, by the way. The jury might wrongfully see that Sam Bankman-Fried did in fact steal billions of dollars and use it improperly. But we're getting to the corker here. We're getting to the headline. So additionally, Bankman-Fried's lawyers want a chance to further develop Bankman-Fried's defense. To that end, they've asked the court to compel federal prosecutors to share any withheld communications or other documents relating to Bankman-Fried's extradition from the Bahamas, as well as additional discovery from FTX that goes beyond the incriminating evidence gathered so far by federal prosecutors. So basically, let me know all the stuff that you have so we know how fucked we are and whether or not we're going to try to enter into some kind of plea or something, most likely. The government has failed to provide the required discovery and particulars needed to defend the case, Bankman-Fried's lawyers argued in a memo. Bankman-Fried could not immediately be reached for comment. So SBF says the US is criminalizing acts of dishonesty. Oh, shit. This one's going to be a fucking corker. So one of the memos supporting Bankman-Fried's motion to dismiss repeatedly paints the FTX founder as perhaps being guilty of lying, but not guilty of violating US laws cited in his indictment. Oh, man. I lied to gain access to people's money and then lied how I was going to use that money and lied while enriching myself. Didn't commit fraud, though, of course. Did not commit fraud. Just a liar. That memo, for example, concedes that Bankman-Fried and his co-conspirators lied on a US bank application to open an account to receive FTX customer deposits after the bank had previously rejected an honest application. But just because the bank was, quote, deprived of the opportunity to conduct enhanced due diligence and executive committee review before opening the account, that doesn't mean that Bankman-Fried committed bank fraud, he said. His lawyers argued. Oh my god. Just because I lied to the bank so that they couldn't determine whether or not what I was doing was legit and they could actually perform a review that mattered, doesn't mean I defrauded the bank. Because what is fraud? He's basically doing that. What is fraud when you really think about it? Well, it's when you lie in to enrich yourself, typically, when you lie in to, make gains financially from that dishonesty and those lies. In fact, let's look it up. What is the fraud definition? Wrongful or criminal deception intended to result in financial or personal gain, or a person or thing intended to deceive others, typically by unjustifiably claiming or being credited with accomplishments or qualities. Wow, it sounds like lying to the bank would constitute as defrauding a bank. That's crazy. I wonder how they're going to fucking wriggle out of that one. To find him guilty of bank fraud, the US would have to prove that Bankman-Fried either deprived the bank of monies, funds, credits, assets, securities, or caused banks to risk suffering economic harm from losing the right to control access to its bank accounts. The lawyers argued. The same argument, lawyers wrote, applies to allegations that Bankman-Fried engaged in a scheme to defraud Alameda's lenders by providing them false and misleading information regarding Alameda's financial condition. Or wire fraud allegations that he, quote, misused FTX customer funds by providing improper loans to Alameda. These things are proven from, you can literally see. On one day, he basically internally turned on the money spigot from money going from FTX to Alameda, which of course nobody externally knew. Nobody knew this was even a possibility. In fact, I think it was even stated publicly that this would never be a thing. It wouldn't happen. And then you see the money flow from the FTX to the availability of Alameda. So by definition, that is fraud, I do believe. Simply making a false statement by itself does not constitute wire fraud, unless it is made for the purpose of obtaining money or property from the victim of the fraud. It's literally what he's done, though. Essentially, lawyers argued that so far there's no evidence of harm caused because fraud requires a scheme to cause economic loss to the victim, which prosecutors allegedly haven't proved. You went bankrupt and lost people billions of dollars. How the fuck can you argue that you didn't commit fraud? Obviously, you're going to have to, because what are you going to say? Yeah, you got me, did it. But this just seems like I don't know, man. I'm not a lawyer, obviously, but this seems fucking wild as an argument. In place of such evidence, Bankman-Fried alleges that federal prosecutors have concocted a hodgepodge of different intangible losses suffered by banks and lenders, including the right to honest services, the loss of control of assets, and the deprivation of valuable information. His lawyers argued that this conflicts with prior court rulings limiting the scope of federal fraud statutes to a narrower definition of property rights so that they do not criminalize all acts of dishonesty. I have been dishonest, I've lied, I've used people's money in ways that I shouldn't have done, and they didn't want me to, and I didn't tell them to. And then I used their money to do things like political donations and funding fucking esports teams and giving money to Riot Games because I'm a Bronze 5 legend in League of Legends. Then, of course, went bankrupt and everyone lost access to all their money, billions and billions of dollars. But I that's not fraud. You put me in prison for that. I was just dishonest. I just lied, Your Honor. Allegedly. In the end, the government is trying to transform allegations of dishonesty and unfair dealing into violations of the federal fraud statutes, Bankman-Fried's lawyers wrote. While such conduct may well be improper, it is not wire fraud. I'm a bad person and I did really bad things, but I didn't commit wire fraud, Your Honor. Bankman-Fried's lawyers seem to suggest that the US government, after struggling to keep up with the cryptocurrency boom, overreacted to news that FTX and Alameda Research were commingling funds. Between 2019 and 2021, the cryptocurrency industry jumped from a total of 64 billion in daily crypto transactions to nearly 3 billion in 2021. During this time, lawyers wrote applicable legal framework for the cryptocurrency industry developed much more slowly, while lawmakers debated whether existing regulations applied or new regulations were needed. One of the biggest questions was how US laws applied to foreign cryptocurrency exchanges like FTX, and indicting Bankman-Fried could seemingly help to answer that question. True. Bankman-Fried has admitted that FTX suffered from a flawed risk management strategy, Reuters reported. However, while FTX associates like former Alameda co-chief executive Caroline Ellison, former FTX technology chief Gary Wang, and former FTX engineering chief Nishad Singh have pled guilty and begun cooperating with the US federal prosecutors, Bankman-Fried continues to plead not guilty. And these are the people I'm talking about that were at the top of the top that have all basically turned around and said, we will help you get Sam Bankman-Fried, the head of the snake, even though they've obviously pled guilty because they're guilty. They're admitting to the crimes and then saying, we'll help you prove that he committed the crimes as well for reduced sentencing or no sentencing. And then he's turning around saying, no, I'm not guilty. I'm the one that was at the top of both these companies, but I'm not guilty of the things that they've pled guilty to. Old strategy, Cotton. Let's see how that one plays out. In yesterday's court filings, he even seeks to contradict some of his alleged co-conspirators' testimony, seeming to verify alleged illegal campaign contributions. Bankman-Fried contends that nothing that has been described by co-conspirators violated US election laws. Well, I'm sure the court will tell you that, whether it did or not. The campaign finance allegations reveal yet again the consequences of the government's rush to indict, Bankman-Fried's lawyers wrote. Whether the court will find Bankman-Fried's defense persuasive amid the ongoing regulatory confusion over the crypto industry remains unclear. Bankman-Fried's lawyers have said that they could be prepared to go to trial by October, according to the New York Times. Meanwhile, the US government still doesn't have a full grasp on how to regulate cryptocurrencies. True. Yesterday, Wall Street Journal analysis of the Securities and Exchange Commission SEC actions showed that the SEC has only now labeled almost 80 crypto tokens as securities. This represents a small percentage of total crypto tokens traded in the US and shows how little of the industry has been addressed in 6 years of enforcement. It has massively ramped up and scaled up now, though. Pretty much all of these indictments, so these big companies and these civil charges and being classified as securities have all came in, I want to say, the last 6 to 12 months. So things are ramping up. I'll leave a link to this Ars Technica article in the video description. Really good read. Sam Bankman-Fried, I think, is fucked. Big old fraud, allegedly. and had to cover it because been covering this the whole time. But there we go. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Peace out.